Hello and welcome to another episode of White and Woke at Work. I'm here today with Joe Cardillo, all the way from Sacramento, California. He's a marketing and communications professional, and I'm very happy to have him here with me today to just share a little bit about his anti-racist journey and get to know him. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to be here.
Good. So tell me a little bit about yourself. You work for a company called Eureka Biz, dealing with underrepresented professionals. Tell me a little bit about that, Joe.
Yeah, for sure. So I am a content marketing manager for Eureka, and we are a platform for, I like the term underestimated founders, but underrepresented entrepreneurs. So Latinx, Asian, Black entrepreneurs, and basically helping small business owners and startups access capital, learn about how to grow their business or how to organize their business, that type of thing. And so I've just joined that team recently.
That is awesome. And how did you come to find this company? Is it just through your anti-racist endeavors, or did they seek you out? Did you seek them out? How did that come to be?
Yeah, it was a referral from a friend that I had worked with several years ago. I spend a lot of time, kind of every waking moment, messaging, DMing, emailing, thinking about trying to support folks who are building their own businesses. And so when I was laid off a couple of months ago, a friend said, "Hey, you should take a look at this organization." And so it just was a really natural fit.
That is awesome. As an entrepreneur myself, I really appreciate that you're working in that field to do something for founders. So tell me, I guess, a little bit about what you were up to before that. Were you always working to benefit people from certain marginalized groups, or is this kind of a new endeavor for you?
Yeah, I would give it kind of a medium. Give myself kind of the medium grade. So this, I think the short story for me is, I grew up in a family of five. My mom was an immigrant from Israel to New York City in the 1960s. And my dad was the son of Italian immigrants living in Syracuse, New York. And, I spent the first several years living in Hawaii on a kind of a small island called Molokai. We then moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where I grew up. And had a pretty uneventful high school and college experience. And then, a few years into working in marketing communications, I started to listen a little bit differently and shift my path. And so I would say around 2013 is when I started to do more work in kind of focused on anti-racism and doing the listening and the thinking and the reading and actually taking action. So
That's awesome. So what were some of the things that you were reading?
Yeah, well, a really formative experience for me. In 2013, I co-founded kind of this like art gallery / zine shop / music space with a really great friend. Her name's Maria Aaron Jones, and she's a brilliant artist, musician, writer, thinker. And at that point, I began to see, because we were co-founders on this project, that her experience was very different from mine. And so I started to read like her zines, and I started to read her written work, and it had a huge impact on me personally because we were friends. And so just beginning to see that like some of the work that we were doing to book shows, to kind of set up, installations and things like that, she was having a completely different experience, even though we were doing the same work essentially.
I'll presume that she was a Black woman.
Yes, that is, yeah, correct.
So what type of experiences was she having compared to you?
Yeah, well, I think a great example that has stuck with me over the years early on. So we would get emails from musicians and artists and writers that would want to book the space. And there's, pretty normal circuit for that. And so eventually once you do it for a year or two, your name gets out there and more people start emailing and calling you. And really early on, we had this one experience where someone contacted us and it wasn't a fit programming wise. And she delivered that news and said, "Hey, it's not quite the right fit." And they looked up the co-founders and then they reached out to me to get a different answer. And that really stuck out for me. And so, that was the first time where I had a conversation with her and said, I think you already talked to these folks, right? And she said, yes, I did. And so we had to have that first conversation that I think anybody who's an equal partner on a project and they're having that different experience has to have is, I said, okay, well, let me make sure I respond appropriately to say, hey, thanks for reaching out. I believe my partner here already, reached out to you, and, her answer is the answer. So that was a really early moment for me to be like, okay, so I need to be minding those moments more.
Yeah, and being supportive, I guess, is really critical for people like yourself who, you're working alongside somebody, you're recognizing their experiences are not exactly the same or consistent, and then doing what you can to alleviate that, to support them. Of course, not taking over, which is great that you did that, because too many times, in the workplace, in workplaces that I've been in, you got somebody who says, don't worry, I'll deal with it. And then you're marginalized, you're pushed down to the side. And then, the white individual will take over whatever the task is. And then you're left kind of thinking, well, that was my idea, or I started that, or I wanted to follow up, or you're feeling a lot less than supported. So that, kudos to you for recognizing that, and then at least having her be the lead, deferring back to her, I think is definitely what should be done in that circumstance. So
yeah, and she, to be fully transparent, she explained that to me. She said, look, here's what's happening when you get this email. And I'll be honest with you, I was like, oh, okay, thank you. I did not know that. And so once I knew that, my actions could change too.
That's awesome. So I guess from your formative years, it sounds like you had a pretty multinational upbringing. I mean, you're in New Mexico. It's not lily white down there. You're exposed to lots of diverse groups. Then you have this experience, you're working alongside a Black colleague. And so I guess she started to introduce you to some of the thinking, the knowledge, the books and things that you needed to know around issues of Blackness.
Yeah. And, I think definitely, I mean, she opened the door to a lot of thinking about, what the experience is like for women of color across the spectrum, or in New Mexico, what a lot of people prefer is, people who are united against colonization. New Mexico is a pretty upfront place, I think, when it comes to talking about the impact of the settler mindset, the Western frontier mindset, manifest destiny, colonization, all those pieces. So I learned a lot from her in respect to that. And then I think another really important thread that I began to pay attention to was, there were a few folks that I started following on Twitter in around that same time, around 2013, like Mickey Kendall, who's a really great author and wrote a book called Hood Feminism that kind of shifted my perspective, and other folks that are now known as Black Twitter. And so I don't think I engaged a lot with that group, but I signed up for the Patreons, and I just started listening and then paying for the knowledge, because I think that was another thing that I began to understand. I was like, oh, there's a lot of people here who have really great knowledge and skill sets that is not being paid for. And so that was another really big piece for me, was to just take that time to do that.
That's awesome. I've got like a friend chirping in my ear, like, ask him if they dated, ask them if they dated, I've got this one friend, he's a cynic, right? He says to me, you're interviewing all these people, but yet, you don't know if they're really down with Black people. Have they dated any Black people? So I'm just gonna ask it point out. I normally wouldn't, because if she's a professional colleague, I presume she was. But Did you date her, or did you date other Black women throughout your lifetime?
It's a great question. We did not date. We've been friends for, close to 10 years now. And, we've worked very closely together, but it was never a romantic relationship. It was always more of like a really deep friendship across the aisle, kind of understanding each other. And then to answer your question directly, I have dated, Chicana and Black women in the past. It's, I'll be honest with you, and I think it's just a great question to raise, is like, how deep was your relationship with people that you were trying to better relate to? I think that's always a good question. So yeah, I mean, I think I think I think that was like that experience I had with that friendship was actually really the first door that opened for me of like really having those other potential friendships and relationships. So while it wasn't romantic, it did set the stage for me.
And so what does, I guess, your anti-racist life look like now in terms of actions that you're taking, both in and out of work, right? Is it,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question.
because I mean, you're working for this great organization that, you know, provides resources for underrepresented entrepreneurs. I presume that they are also a diverse workplace, but you know, are there things that you need to do or actions that you are taking currently in your role to ensure diversity of thought, ideas? Um, yeah, tell me a little bit more about the things that you're actually doing.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, for sure, the company is a diverse team at the executive level and at the team leadership level, like different business units. And that was a big part of why I joined. Is I have a lot of appreciation for it, and I value creative thinking and innovation. And I'll answer your other question more directly in a second. But one of the things that I just wanted to mention too that really shifted for me over the last several years was, you know, I saw that the humanity of my colleagues, coworkers, friends, family needed to be amplified and supported and reinforced. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I also saw that we were losing in the companies, organizations, and communities that I'm a part of. I saw that we were losing creativity. We're doing worse work because it was all white people. And I see no reason to be anything other than direct about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, part of my interest in doing the kind of the more hands-on stuff, which I'll share a little bit more in a second to your question, is I just, you know, want to be in a place where I'm creative, innovative, and thoughtful. And I came to understand that, you know, I don't need, you know, 70-page annual reports to do that. I can just believe that that is a thing that is important, and I can do work on a daily basis to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need permission is kind of the way that I approached it. And so that includes things like, you know, really like taking the time to, you know, kind of decode workplaces and professional situations, like negotiation of salary and terms and conditions is a big piece. So I've spent the last 5 years just kind of quietly checking in with my colleagues, to the point where sometimes I'll even, you know, do things like say, hey, look, I don't know what our pay transparency is like, but let me tell you what I make. Let me understand how I can support you as you come up for your annual review next year. You know, those kinds of like hands-on negotiation, decoding the workplace type things. That's something I'm serious about. I also think there's a lot of value in, as I was kind of touching on earlier, like paying people for their knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and maybe I'll be a little cheeky here and just say, like, maybe I find this to be a kind of funny that I'm, you know, reading about the CEO of LinkedIn and his conversation with Aisha Joseph about this kind of ongoing, the last few months, the suppression of content from leading Black voices.
Yeah.
And I find myself like having this ironic moment of like, we should be paying Black women who are experts in diversity and inclusion for their knowledge. So that's something I've been doing too for a few years, because I think your perception of knowledge changes when you say, I value this, I value you. And, you know, payment is one way to make sure that you have real stakeholder, you know, a stakeholder position. So,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of requests for meetings. Lots of people want to, you know, pick your brain. You know, can I have 30 minutes of your time? And then,
Yeah.
you know, invariably you realize in that conversation that they're trying to harvest ideas from you, right? And so you do have to kind of strike a balance as a DEI consultant and pull back and say, well, you know, let's chat about that further. We can explore that opportunity in another chat, right? Like try to put them off a little bit, because you're right. Too many people don't value the voices, the contributions of not just Black women, but Black people generally.
Yeah.
So it's great to hear that you're doing your part to do that. Can I talk to you a little bit then, Joe, about, I guess, just your upbringing? It sounds like, you know, your parents definitely exposed you to a lot. Your schools, were they diverse? Were they inclusive? Or or not? What was your home life like? Let's go there for a little bit.
Yeah, great question. I think so. I was homeschooled till high school, so I didn't get elementary school and middle school. I was a weird kid. That it's common when you're in homeschool. You get kind of like you spend a lot of time outdoors or in a book, and I did both of those things. But my mom was very like hands-on and really like I would say helped to guide us in being creative people and being creative thinkers. And so all three of her kids, myself and my brother and sister, are all very we're all like very much willing to think about things that we don't understand, and to consider new information. And so I think that's really an important piece that helped. When I did get to high school, I went to a public school for a year and I got my ass kicked because I didn't understand any social structures when I arrived. Yeah. So I said everything you're not supposed to say in a public high school, like a big public high school, and I got my butt kicked a little bit.
Give me an example.
Well, yeah. So, I first week of class, I'm in PE in the locker room, and I've never been in a PE class. So I knew very little about how people felt about being naked in a locker room. And I really don't recall how it happened, but I think I was like sticking out like a sore thumb in some way. And so the captain of the freshman football team and their sort of second in command came up and they had me up against the locker, and they were going to beat snot out of me, I think. And I'm like, first week of school. And he said something like, what are you going to do about it? And I said, without thinking, I said, well, I think you guys are going to beat me up, but I'm going to break one of your noses. Like, just like a weird response. And he just laughed so hard because there's this like weird shrimpy little kid. And he puts me down and he's like, you're really weird. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And so we actually became friends, and it was a weird story.
Does he have a different race?
He was Hispanic. Yeah. Yeah. But fairly light. So I don't know if it was, if our interaction was deeply related to the difference in our upbringing or our experience or our skin color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went to this school from being homeschooled, and you had these awkward moments, but how diverse was your school? And I guess how much did that influence your future behaviors? I mean, it sounds like your mom set a great foundation, but it doesn't sound like there was any like overt racism going on at home.
No, absolutely not. No. And, I had grandparents that, used language that I don't use, right? I think my grandparents on my dad's side grew up with the word Negro. It was just when they were it came to America in the 30s and I think 30s, that was the common term.
Right.
But outside of that, I don't remember any super overt racism, although I'm sure there was some stuff that I didn't see as a kid around me, extended. But in my immediate home life, no, I think my parents were pretty tough about that.
So they set the foundation, I guess, for you to keep an open mind and to approach diversity and diverse experiences with, I guess, a breadth of understanding and appreciation for differences. It sounds like she did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate to have a mom who was influenced by feminism, and so she brought that same ethos to raising her kids to help us be independent and thoughtful.
It's very interesting, this concept of feminism, influencing white thought leaders like yourself who are open-minded and appreciative of diversity and the Black experience. It's come up as a common thread through the videos, and I need to pause the recording because my doorbell's ringing. Can you just give me a second?
You're good. Cool.
So we've been hearing a lot through the conversations that I'm having with the different people in this series, and it's coming up as a common thread throughout that feminism is one of those things that kind of opens the door to open-mindedness with respect to the Black experience and anti-Black racism in particular. So can you talk to me a little bit about, that for you and what you think might be why that might be the case?
Yeah. I think a good way to frame sort of impact for me is, so we talked just a little bit about kind of my upbringing, and, I went to a public high school for a year, and then at the end of high school, I ended up at a private high school. I got like scholarshiped into this really nice, prep school. Huge advantage, just a huge advantage. And then I went to a liberal arts college. And so as I ended high school and went to college, I had what I would consider the more like, and I don't consider myself woke, just to be really upfront. I consider myself waking, right? Like, this is work. It takes a long time. It's a long practice. And I'm like nowhere near where I would like to be someday. But that experience was really also the first time that I saw this like structural racism where everything was so coded in, but it was not polite to talk about it, right? Standard dynamics. And so when I think back to what my mom brought to the table with her own experience, I think it's this willingness to like dig in and really work on interpersonal stuff. Like, racism is not an abstract thing. And I think that's something that feminism made very clear to me, even though my mom, I don't remember used the words intersectionality when I was a kid or anything like that. She brought that ethic of like, you need to consider people's experiences. You need to take the time to like put aside yourself and like, just like really figure out where people are at. And you need to do that for a lot of different kinds of people. And I think that's a hallmark of the kinds of feminism that have seeped into my brain and helped me think, more deeply about my own relationships.
And so how did that impact, I guess, what the structural things that you were seeing in the school that you were at?
Yeah. Well,
okay, I guess tell us what were you seeing? What were some of the things
yeah.
you were seeing?
Well, I mean, I think there was a lot of like what I would call dialogue, but there wasn't a lot of like action. And I think this is not an atypical experience, a predominantly white liberal arts college in the Midwest. There's trade-offs. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
But I think, the focus on like, we can all have conversations, we can all get along, we can all appreciate each other's differences, but not too much. Let's not go too far. And I don't think that was the experience for everybody in that situation, but I do think there was that kind of like thing that can happen. And I'm very honest about this. I don't ever remember using the phrase like, I don't see color or all lives matter or any of that, but it was in my head. I think I wanted that to be true. I think I wanted this sense of equality where we would all get along and we didn't have to actually do the real work of it, right? And so that experience, I think, was formative in that it just helped me see that, oh wow, that's the norm that's impressed upon me. That's not actually how I feel. But if you're not careful and you don't like look into it, you will absolutely start to like absorb that kind of structural racism into your daily life. And so it was, I'm honest, it was a part of my life. I let that in, and it's something I've had to work on.
I'm glad you said that, because there's a lot of people who, they feel like, I'm not racist, and of course all lives matter, and they don't understand some of the structural things that might be occurring to make them feel the way that they do. So for me, this series is really it's instructive. That's the reason that I'm doing it, to help people to own their I'm not racist statements, but also to recognize that you have to do something. You have to convert that to action in order to be anti-racist. So yeah, it's awesome that you just pointed that out. so clearly. I want to also touch on a little bit more of the actual things that, you know, people like yourself can do. I mean, you're on LinkedIn, you're really, really active there. Do you want to share a little bit about, I guess, what you're doing there, and how we came to know one another, and
Yeah.
share about some of the things that you're actually doing on the platform?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so this is my, my personal approach to it is that consistency is really important. It's a long game. There's a lot of effort. You've talked about that, and other folks have talked about that too, especially on LinkedIn. Like, it's not it's not something where you walk by and you drop a alm in the plate, or you put a little, you put a buck in the hand of somebody that needs it, and you just, oh great, I fixed it. It's not going to work that way. And when you do, we were talking a little about earlier, but when you do listen in and you pay attention, you pay people to help you, consult or work through, or whatever it is, you get those elements of knowledge. You see that it is a very long game. So I think the consistency piece is important. And I mean, I think that's, to be honest with you, that's one of the things that I've worked on really a lot over the last couple of years. Is like, I have my own anti-racism like workbook. It's like, there's a few different versions that I've, practiced with well-known authors, et cetera. But I have a daily practice that I go back and I keep looking at those kinds of things to go, okay, how's that working? Do I need to do more? And so that includes things like, like what I would call kind of getting in the way with empathy, right? Like, when you see racism, not just being like, that's terrible. Like, and then, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I saw this in workplaces where people would do the thing and they're like, after the thing happens, they're like, oh my God, that's so. And I'm just going to be honest, like, my friends who are white women that I've worked with do that so much that I was just like, what are you doing over there? Like, no, you have to deal with it in the moment. And so I think getting in the way is a really important part of that. And that can be very uncomfortable. And so you have to get used to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I mentioned earlier, the decoding is really important, making sure that your colleagues and folks that you work with, are vendors, partners, et cetera, that you're paying attention and that you're stepping in to support them where they need it. So I call that like standing next to somebody. It's not about being behind or in front. It's like right next to the person to be supportive at the most important time, so that when to get in the way, is also a big part of it. Yeah.
That is awesome. It's really nice that you have a daily practice. Because you're right. It's there's no one moment where, we have to arrive at a place and say, well, that's it, my work here is done. There's, when you're dealing with cultural competency, which is what anti-racism really is. Cultural competency is a lifelong journey. You're never going to get to the end of it, precisely because society is constantly changing. Culture is constantly changing. People are constantly changing. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, and just to support that, I mean, that's the perfect point. I attended a webinar earlier this year with Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who's an incredible scholar and professor, and she talked about how racism is innovative and how white supremacy is innovative, which sounds weird, right? On the surface, you're like, innovation. But what she was sort of pointing out was that, like, it evolves, right? It changes over time. And so our own practices have to evolve to keep working on that too, which I think is perfectly in line with what you're, kind of mentioning too.
Yeah, I think it would be great for us to explore that a little further. I'm going to have you come back, Joe, for a future episode, hopefully with some others, and we can talk a little bit about just precisely that, like issues of white supremacy and what it looks like and how it manifests itself today. I'm going to thank you for coming on and just say that this was another awesome discussion with lots of little nuggets for people to take away. I appreciate you sharing your story and your journey, and your current practice and the things that you're doing right now to be an active anti-racist. I appreciate you. And I'm just going to share one more time that, if the viewers out there want to get a hold of Joe, he's available on LinkedIn at Joe Cardillo, and he's also on Eureka.biz. So that's Eureka, Ureeka.biz. I am Janelle Benjamin. You can reach me at on Twitter at JB_Equitable. Or at allthingsequitable.ca. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please click, like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joe.